Just in case you were wondering, if your lock was bad, but your regulator wasn't bad, can you fit that lock set inside of here with the window up and just the regulator bar there? Doesn't look like we can change the lock set out without taking the regulator off anyway, so we got to do it for this job, so we're going to do both at the same time. Well, 335i has joined our group of BMWs along with my M6 over here and my wife's 650i. My son picked this one up for a pretty good price. So today we're going to get set up because the driver's side window regulator is bad, and I stuck a board in there to hold the window up, but it's bad, so I got to replace it, as well as the door lock won't lock, so the vehicle's not locking right now. We'll get set up here. It's a pretty easy swap out. You just got to get to it, so we'll get these things swapped out. Alright, so step one of this whole thing is we've got to get the inner panel off, but it's not too complicated. There's some bolts back behind here, and then we got to take this little pad out, and then we'll be able to pull all this panel off and we can access what we do. So if you feel right down in here, you won't be able to see it on the camera, but there's a little indentation, and so you just want to slip a pry tool in there and get it prying. You may have to take two tools, but you want to pry, and it's actually hooked up here, so you want to pry everything off and then unfold it out of this right here. So you just keep wiggling and keep popping the hooks, and you'll get it to pop out of there. So like that. So you can see there's the hook that's on top. It goes right up under there, and then all these little guys just sit in these little hooks right here. So step one, getting that off. So now what we want to do is get this little switch assembly out. So it's hinged in the back, so you got to start in the front, and if it's never been out, it's going to be really difficult to get out of there. But you got to start in the front right here and push down with your pry tool, and there's a little catch right inside of there, and you push the little catch and then you just raise up a little bit, and once you get it raised up, you can pop it out. So we get that guy out of there, and then we're going to disconnect him. And see there's a connector on the back. Pretty easy to disconnect these BMW ones. You just push down on it, flip the little tab, and away you go. So now we got our switch assembly out. Still pretty easy. So now what we need to do is get the screws loose that hold this whole assembly in. So there's a couple of them. Up here is a star. So we just got to find the right star tool. Now when you're doing star tools, the littler ones will fit even in a bigger one. It's not the right one. So the best thing to do is always go up. So start with one that's bigger than what you think it is, and just make sure it's bigger so it doesn't fit. And then I'm going to work my way down, because you can get one that's actually feels like it fits, but it's too small. So that one's still too big. So I'm just going to work my way down. Don't work your way upward. Just keep working down until you find the one that fits. So there you go. So see, now I know for sure that that is the right one, because I went from bigger to smaller. So just got to take that screw out. And there's one more down here that's probably the same. Torx. So with the two screws loose, I'm going to get a magnet and pull them out of there so I don't lose them. And there's the second. So we got our two screws out. So now there's not much holding this whole thing on. You can see it's pretty wiggly. So now we just got to go around the edges and pop the little edge trim pieces loose. So that's where we get our pry tool again. And we'll just start back on the bottom corner down here. Get our tool up under it. And our fingers. And then we just give it a pop. And once we got it popped, now we can take it off, but I want to set it on something so it stays clean. So we'll get us a piece of cardboard or something and set it down here. Then we'll have something to set it on. So let me grab a piece of cardboard and I'll set it down on the floor. Now we just need to lift it up out of the seal. And there we go. So So there's our little side panel, and it's got the latching mechanism which pops off real easy. Just pull down and tip sideways, so that one comes loose. And we got some wires, so we got a little optical thing right here. You have to pinch and pull the little black connector off like that, so the little black one comes off. That guy stays on there. And then we just got the switch harness, which is where the switches were, and it pushes back through the hole. And finally, there's the little connector for the light at the bottom. You just take it loose. So now we got our inner panel out of the way. We can set him to the side, and then we can get to this regulator. Alright, so we want to keep up with our wiring. You can see this wire goes over, these wires go down. So when I take this off, I want to make sure that my wires come out of the same spot. So I put some marks right here to identify where that wire comes up. I put a couple little dots right there to identify that one. And then over here, that way when I put this back on, I can make sure these wires are coming out the right spot. So next up, we just got to take the sticky little guard thing off. And this is reusable if you just pull it loose like that. And you can see, there's my board holding the glass up right now because this regulator was bad. So that's why we're replacing the regulator, is because the window wouldn't work. There we go. Like I say, it stays sticky, so we're going to reuse that. So as long as we don't get it dirty, it'll stay sticky. Let's put that over there. So now we got access to getting this regulator out of here, and our door lock we're going to do at the same time. So we'll do the regulator removal first, and that's going to give us some good access to get in here to the door lock, so we can take the door lock out because that regulator is kind of in the way. Alright, so time to get the board out, but before I take the board out, because this regulator's broke and I disconnected the connector to the motor, but the motor's still connected to it. But I had to cut a cable to get the window up. You'll have to have the window up or down. You're going to have to move it around a little bit. So if the regulator won't work, you're going to have to get in there with a pair of cutters and cut some of the little cables that lift the regulator up and down in order to get the window up so you can access some of this stuff. But if I take my board out, my window's going to fall down. So what I'm going to do is put some tape over the top of the window, and I'm going to stick it to both sides of the window. That way, that tape will hold that window up for me, and I can scooch it down when I need to. So we're going to get that tape on there. That's going to keep my window from falling, and I can move it as I need to. Alright, so with the window tape, now I can cut my board out, and I don't have any fear of that glass falling. This part you wouldn't have to do because you probably don't have a board holding your glass up, but I had to do that so he could get on the road with the car so we could drive it a little bit. Alright, so just in case you were wondering, if your lock was bad but your regulator wasn't bad, can you fit that lock set inside of here with the window up and just the regulator bar there? Well, I checked just to see because it's going to go in there like that. So if you try to put it in there, it actually hits the bar of this lift mechanism. So it doesn't look like you can get it up in there without taking the window regulator out. I mean, it almost wants to fit, but you got to keep in mind the back side is actually the skin of the door. So if you start flexing on it, you're liable to put a dent in that out there. So it doesn't look like we can change the lock set out without taking the regulator off anyway. So we got to do it for this job, so we're going to do both at the same time. On to the regulator. So what I got to do, it's held on. If we look at the one we're going to change out to, if you look on the regulator here, the glass is held into these clips right here. So there's a hole inside the glass that goes into that clip, and it goes in there like that right there. So what we got to do is lower the window down so we can get these clips off of the old regulator. Then we can take the regulator out. So first we got to get the window lowered down a little bit. So let's do that real quick. right there, because I got to be able to pop those free. So I can get to this one right here, but the other one is still somewhere up here, so I can't get to it to pop the glass free. So I got to go down just a little further till I can get it to the point that I can feel those. There we go. So what I did is reach back behind the glass, took my fingers and put them in the catches and pulled down and then picked the glass up. So now that regulator's free. Now we just got to slide it down so we can get our hand in there and do the very same thing with the other. And it's tight in here, so kind of hard to get to. So what I'm doing is reaching back behind the glass with my fingers and I'm pushing on that white catch to try to pop the glass up. And there we go. So now both of our little white guys are out. So now we can pick up the glass, lock it back up top, and we can take the regulator out. So it does take a little bit of finger strength, but you can see the glass is free now. And you got to be careful that you don't get it out of its groove, because now there's really nothing holding the glass. So let's get us some more tape, because we don't want our glass falling down while we're working. Alright, so the regulator's only held on with these 4 little bolts right here. But first we got to disconnect the motor, because the motor's still good on this one. If you had a bad motor, you'd have to get a new motor too. But the motor's still good, it just janked up the cable. So I've already disconnected it, but you just disconnect the motor right there. And that ought to be about everything holding this regulator in. Then we just got to take the bolts loose and swap out this regulator. Got one side, now we just want to do the other. It is just right on that glass, so we got to be real careful with that. Then, just a matter of getting the old regulator out of there. You can see these cables were broken. This cable's supposed to be up top, and that cable's supposed to be on the bottom. So the regulator is quite messed up. But we need to save the motor to use it on our other one. So we got to get this guy out here without breaking anything. So these guys are clipped in right here. So we got to keep that in mind. That's what holds the cables in place to keep the regulator from biting the cable. So that little guy comes out, and out comes the regulator. So, carefully feed him out of that hole. And there we go. So there's our broke up regulator. And you can see that little connector is on the new one. I'm probably going to have to transfer that over. But now we got our old regulator out, so we can set it down over there and get to work on the lock here in just a second. So let's get all this over here. I may go ahead and swap the motor over, and then we'll be ready to install it once we get the lock set out. Alright, so while we got the regulator out, I'm going to go ahead and swap the motor over to the new regulator. So it came out of there like that right there. So what we got to do is put the motor back on that way, but we got to take it loose. This one we don't care about. But we need to know the orientation of the motor. So the way the motor is going to go on there, if I'm flipped this way, it's going to sit underneath like that right there. So we got it oriented so we can just take it off and put it on the other one. Alright, so where the screw's out, now we just need to take the motor off. see this one was all wound up in there. So our motor's still good though, and it's got a little clutch that lines up in there. So what we got to do is line that back up over here, and then we'll just screw it back together. So it looks like that, and it mounted like that, right? So we just got to mount him like this right here over on this side. So to do that, we got to cut the little cable off and then slide it all together to get it in the right position. Alright, so this is where careful comes in, because you don't want that little spool guy popping out of there for scissor, or you'll be getting you another regulator, because it's really hard to rewind one of these guys without the machine. So what we want to do is put this guy on there, and it's going to be oriented like that. So we slip him on there, and then we got to lock the teeth into the hub on the regulator. And then we got to rotate back to where we can bolt it up. Like that. So like I say, you got to be real careful. You don't want to get those cables out in there, because if you screw them up, you're going to be buying a new one. So now we got it put in place. Now we just need to tighten these up real quick before we lose anything. So I got my little popper dude to go back in the middle. Everything's ready to go. So now we can go over here and have a look, see it taking this lock set out. Alright, so for the lock set, it's a pretty interesting little fella. Goes in there like that. So we got a couple of things on the front here. We got that guy. This is the inner latch that, like, if I lock it, that guy unlocks it. And then on the back side, you've got this one. That's for the handle on the outside. So if I lock it and I pull down on that one, it unlocks it. So there's a cable inside of here. And like I say, you probably couldn't get this in there with this regulator bar in, so you probably have to take the glass loose from the regulator, take this, at least this side off, and pull this one out of the way to be able to get this guy in there. But we got to connect that guy up. This is the lock that goes from the door, and then these guys on the inside. So these two are a little bit fun. I'll see if I can get the camera in there so you can see that cable. But the lock one is pretty easy once you know how to do it. So we'll start by taking the lock set out on that side over there and get it out of the way. To do that, there's a little access hole right here. Oop. And what you do is right inside of here on an angle is an Allen wrench. And so you got to loosen that up. What that's going to do is allow you to take your lock out. So just turn him till he loosens up. You can probably leave it in there. Maybe it's not going to fall down in the door. I don't know. Doesn't seem like it wants to come out, so hopefully we'll be careful and leave him in there. Then the little light thing that's underneath here, that stays with the door. You got to get just the lock set out. So you got to pull on it, give it a little bit of wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. But don't try to pull on the light. Pull on the sides, because the light's going to stay. And there is the lock set. That goes into that hole in the back, and it's keyed. It's got big up and down and a little sideways. You got to make sure you got your setup right for that. So that guy's out, so that frees up that hole. Now we just got to get the cable on the inside, and then we can unbolt the thing. So let me see if I can get the camera in there and a flashlight, and we'll see. I'll show you that cable. Alright, so looking inside the door, this is where the regulator was, speaker and all of that. If we look around that corner right there, you can see that white one right there. That's the one that's got to be disconnected from the latch. The rest of that stuff up there can stay. We just got to get that one loose, and then we got to put him back on there. So it pops free, and then it unhooks, and then we got the back side free. All we got to do is come around here, take that off, and then we can unbolt it right there and unbolt it over here and disconnect the power, and we should be good. So I'm going to reach right inside of there, and I'm going to take that white one loose, pulling out on it hopefully, and we'll pop it down and take it loose from up there. Then we'll be in good shape with that cable. Alright, so let's see if we can get that cable pulled loose from the inside. Now that our regulator's out of the way, so we're just going to grab it on the bottom and pull down on it, and then it pops free on the bottom. And then we just grab it up top and try to get it out of that little holder. Oh, there we go. So I just had to keep pulling on it. So now the cable's free. And then there's a little electrical connector with one of those Christmas tree things on it that has to come loose. So we got to get that little electrical connector pushed out of his Christmas tree. It's just one of those harness clips. So that's got everything we need out of the way. On the inside. So now on the outside we just got to take this guy loose. So all we do is just pull down on him and wiggle him loose. There we go. It just sticks in there like that, so just pull straight out on it. We'll put it back in there the same way. And then we just got our electrical connection. It's got a little clip on the top and the bottom. You got to push those little clips. I'll show you right there. Little clip on the top, little clip on the bottom. So you push those and it'll pull that connector loose. So now we got all that done. And we just got to take those three loose and we should be able to pull it out. So one word of caution when you're doing this, if you pull on that handle right there and pull it out, it's going to pull it out of its catch. You're going to have to take a screwdriver and slide it right through this hole right here and pick that catch back up and put that pull handle back into the catch. So don't freak out if you do it. You just got to lift the little metal tabs back up, put it back in there, and you're good to go. So with the 3 bolts out, it's kind of sticky. But now, with the regulator out of the way, we can take that guy right out of there. And you can see there's another wire connector clip right there that keeps it out of the way of the glass, so we got to get him out of there as well. One of those little Christmas tree things. And we'll put those back in there so they don't get in the way of the glass. So there we go. There is our broke one. So now we just got to replace it with our other one and put it all back in there. So we'll get our other one and we'll slide him back up in there. So that little connector went right here, and then it goes back in, and we want to slide him back in place. That cable that goes around, you got to make sure it's not pinched behind it. You got to make sure that cable is clear, or else that'll cause you some problem. Now we just bolt him back in there. And our little guy goes back on. He just pushes back in there. He's back. We got our electrical connector to hook back up. And we're getting close. All we got to do is get the cable on the inside. And so we'll start with the top part, hooking it back into the hooks. And then grab the bottom part and put it in the catcher. And put a little wire connector back on. So now that's in good shape. So all we got to do is put our latch back on, and then we're ready to give this thing a try and see if it's going to work once we put our regulator back in. But like I say, I'll put the regulator in, and then I won't hook the glass up. Once I get all that put back in, then we'll put the switch module back on and we'll check everything and make sure. That way if something doesn't work, I don't have the glass already hooked in. It makes it that much easier. Alright, so just in case you did this and it freaked you out, let me zoom in here. This is the outside of the door. And so if I grab the handle without the lock in there, there's nothing to stop the handle from coming out. And it'll actually jump out of the little catch that it's in. See right there? So if you pull that, it's going to pop that right out of there. Well, what you need to do is just take a screwdriver. Let me zoom out just a little bit. You just take a screwdriver and stick it through that access hole. Come right in behind the tab right there. And what you'd have to do is raise the center tab up and then lock that thing back down in there. You can see it locks in and out. So if you did yank it and it popped out of there, all you do is stick a screwdriver in there raise it back up and set that little mechanism back in there, and then it locks it back down. So just a little tip, just in case you did it, that we'll be able to fix that real quick, and it didn't hurt anything. Alright, so time to put our lock set back in, and what we want to do is make sure that the whitey portion of that is up in our lock in here, and it is. So all we do is just stick that back in there, and you'll see that cable that goes to this side, so just keep it over on that side, and we just want to put that in there with the cable to the right and line it all back up and get it to drop back in its little hole there. So easy peasy with that cable over on this side. Now we'll just tighten our Allen bolt back up, and we should have our lock set changed up. Alright, so on to the regulator. Let's see if our lock works when we push down on things. Yep, so now that works good. It didn't work before. So now we can lock the car and then unlock the car and lock the car and pull the handle and it unlocks it. So everything's working mechanically. Now once we hook the electrical up, we can see what's going on. So now let's get our regulator back in and we can get everything buttoned up. Alright, so it's time to install the regulator. Shove it back in this hole, and you saw how painful it was to get it out. Now we got to figure out how to fold it up and get it in there. So we're going to start with the motor side, and we got our glass all the way up. So now it's just a matter of negotiating this thing past all the electrical and past all of the things that it catches on. Some form of a little sensor here, so that guy feels like he's in the way. Let me pop him loose. We're going to pull that little sensor out of the way. Right there. And then we ought to be able to slip that up in there. We got a little problem with how they're shipped this. These slides are down so low they're hitting everything. So what I got to do is actually raise them up. So let me take it back out of there, because what's happening is these little slides right here, they're hitting right on this plate, so I can't get anything to lock in. So I'm going to have to energize this motor and crank this regulator up a little bit to get it to clear this. The little plates have to come up. So we're going to have to turn the car on, and we're going to have to move this regulator up just a little bit. So what I'm going to have to do, unfortunately, because they got them shipped out of position real bad, I'm going to have to hook up my little connector here so I can move this window up and down. Right there. Then I'm going to have to hook up the regulator motor to its motor connector, and we're going to have to move it a little bit. Power up the car, and now I want to move that regulator up about like that. Now we can disconnect it. So apparently it wasn't in the shipping position, proper shipping position there. Now we can get it. So now all we got to do is drop our glass back down and land in those slides right there. So now we can untape the glass. Looks like the cables are out of the way. Everything looks good there. Don't feel any cables hitting anywhere. So let's slide it down and see if we can get it to latch into the glass again. Little by little. There's one, and there's the other. So now our glass is back in to our slide. So let's put our little connector back on and let's check and make sure that it's going to go up and down. So now, if everything works right, and there we go. Our window's back working good again. Alright, so now all we got to do is put the insides back on. Then we can check it and make sure things are going to lock and unlock. Unlock. So now everything's working. So we're in good shape. Well, alrighty. All we got to do is finish up the insides and then we'll call this job done. And there we go. Now we're all finished up. We just got to test it out, make sure everything works, and then we'll be in good shape. So let me fire it up and I'll roll the windows up and down, and then we'll lock it and make sure it's good. And we just hit the lock button, and there we go. Even the soft touch is working. So let me put the keys down to make sure it won't unlock. And there we go. Well, alrighty. Hope that helps someone, and thanks for watching.